Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt Santee, and today on the show, Dan Hodgins
Hi
and,
there.
and Richard Cohen.
Hello, everyone.
And we are here to respond to this anonymous quote. This is our quote. I'm fucking sick of talking and hearing about universal child care or universal pre-K. See, I can't even say it. I'm so mad about it.
Oh, but it wasn't you. You said it was an anonymous
No, I
quote.
couldn't restate the quote.
Oh, that person's quote.
I'm not saying that it's me who said that.
I see.
Okay.
Okay.
I want to protect the anonymity of that good and wise person.
Thank you.
So anyway, I invited two other folks. Well, actually, I think these two folks somehow evolved the conversation and we decided to podcast about it. I don't know that I invited either of you. It was not my idea maybe this time. But anyway, here we are to talk about Universal PreK. It's in the news again. It's in our politics still and again, and I'm tired. So we kind of, what? Go ahead. Well,
I was going to say, let's just set the stage for a quick second and say, so we're recording this on May 4th, and
or the
5th, and we just heard President Biden's address to the country the middle of last week, which was related to this topic, but also spoke about something more broad, which was funding childcare. And I think there's a lot to unpack. We all had very emotional reactions to that.
Yeah, and what he said, and I heard him say it in the campaign too, was, and I mean school, not daycare, when he was on the topic of universal pre-K, which is.
But then I think the pandemic took a whole lot of people up to the CC words, childcare.
Right. But he said it again in this address. He said school, not daycare. And I think it's when he gets off scripted, he goes into that. So anyway,
but in all defense, and I'm not supporting universal pre-K. I want to make sure that people are aware of that. But remember, we haven't talked about early childhood in terms of politically. For over 4 years. And now we're talking about it. And I see that as at least moving in a positive direction. Yes, President Biden said some things that are not politically correct, are not necessarily what we as early childhood people think is important, but damn it, we're talking about it. And it's been, and again, I'm not saying that to defend what he said. I'm saying that we haven't talked about early childhood in a long time.
And I was 100% fine not talking about it for the last 4 years. I didn't need that happening.
And I think, there's people who were on internet saying, I'm in support of this. I'm really happy that we're finally looking at universal pre-K for everyone. And then some people are saying it's going to wipe out all of the private, already excellent programs. So there's a real major two sides. There's not a middle. Would you agree in terms of that? There's really two sides of this real issue.
Well, I would say there's at least three sides.
I think
there's the people, there's the two sides you just mentioned. And then I think there's the people who are like the three of us, who have a whole other set of concerns. That also looked at.
I'm okay. What the part of this that I'm okay with when we're talking specifically about what Biden said in his address to Congress is that he said universal pre-K, but he also has a plan for universal child care, and that's being part of the conversation. And I do think that's a good thing. Although I think they should all read Elliot Haspel's book, Crawling Behind, to figure out how to do that in a way that that won't make me cry.
What's the title of his book, Heather?
Crawling Behind: America's Child Care Crisis and How to Fix It. He's been on the show. He was on maybe last summer. It's really well written. And it's a common sense sort of playbook for seeing childcare as a common good, and essentially putting a lot of public investment in it like we do schools, but not to do it like school. And even like, I mean, I can't, I'm not going to tell, go through the whole book, but it's really hard to argue with. And he kind of takes both political sides and parts of his conversation. So it's a good one.
And I would hope that any of your long-term listeners or viewers are able to make the connection between this topic and so many that have been discussed on your podcast over, in the very least, recent months.
Yeah.
All the ones with Carol Garbodin Murray and
Mm-hmm.
CARE, and how early childhood education, your children in their first 5 years of life are much better served by CARE
Mm-hmm.
than by school.
Right.
Hopefully see the connection between that and what we're about to unpack right now.
Yeah. So what we kind of talked about, and by we, I mean Richard, before we hit record,
Yes.
was maybe just talking about some of the arguments for Universal PreK that we've heard, and sort of, I don't know, bitch about them, but in a nicer, more professional, much more intellectual way. I warned the guys I was really grouchy before we started recording. They told me to embrace it, so it's their fault if you don't like this podcast.
Well, Dan,
right.
Earlier you said that there were a lot of people that you had talked to or read about or heard from that seemed very excited about the idea. Did any of them give you specifics about why they were excited?
Yes, one that come up frequently is the idea that the preschool for all meant that children and families who could not afford preschool were now going to be able to get preschool. I mean, that's the argument that they use.
Yeah.
That's not my argument, of course.
But that sounds great, Dan. Why wouldn't that be a good thing? Do tell.
It's not just preschool, it's what do we classify as quality?
Yes.
Yep. That's to me, the crock of this whole thing is what's, because the other day, for example, the governor of Florida has now initiated the fact that we are going to have preschool, quality preschool, and it's going to be funded by the state. And we're going to make sure that assessments focus on literacy and math.
Right.
Yeah. So that kind of crap,
yes,
that kind of, intellect, if we can call it that,
yeah,
it bothers and concerns me as we're addressing the issue of preschool for all.
So there's a lot of people who, again, are listening, who probably are still confused because they heard what you just said as literacy and math. Well, yes, we want that. So what upset you about that, Dan?
The fact that I want to focus on relationships.
All three of us have that in common, yes.
Yeah, the ultimate quality program to me is what do they do to support relationships? And therefore, literacy, math, academic, cognition, all of that other stuff is going to happen easier than if we don't focus on relationships. And nobody, when they talk about, even in the past, when we've talked about universal preschool, because this is not a new issue.
right.
This is, an issue that comes up frequently. And the fact that we don't focus on play, we don't focus on relationships, we don't focus on feelings, emotion, etc., and authenticity, we don't focus on that. So preschool for all would not necessarily be a preschool for all. It would be only for those individuals who believe that academics are important. Does that make any sense?
Yeah,
sure does.
And most often, I guess I have yet to see any state standards for early childhood that were developed with many early childhood people as part of that process.
True.
So if we're saying we're going to do universal preschool for all, and we really want to focus on literacy and math, we better have some people who understand how literacy and math works, develops, what's important and what's not in these early ages that we're talking about, or else we're wasting a lot of money. We're disrespecting children and setting some of them up for failure in the name of giving them a step up.
Well, I will say I have seen that.
Okay.
I mean, I've been on the team, on at least one state's team of developing their early learning.
Maybe
standards.
I meant core curriculum. No, I didn't mean the early childhood standards. I'm sorry.
What did you mean?
The core curriculum for elementary school that gets pushed down, or that people look at, like they look at the kindergarten standards and say, if we just do this in preschool earlier, they'll have that leg up. So yeah, I'm sorry, Richard, I misspoke. And then
No, it's okay. But I mean, that's a whole other aspect of this complex topic to unpack, which is the design of our national public school system that is designed to be sequential, to build on prior knowledge, and ultimately to serve certain purposes that we could have a whole other podcast on wondering about. And if you go down that road and you continue to use that logic, then you start to create a curriculum in which the 4-year-old curriculum builds on the 3-year-old curriculum, on the 2-year-old, and on the infant. And you've suddenly lost the entire understanding of the holistic development and the neurological development that happens in the first 5 years.
Right. And the way learning happens, we'll talk all the time about how we know it's not linear and it's not separated into categories like literacy and math. But then our practice doesn't always reflect that, and the standards of our field don't reflect that. So I guess I get mad that policymakers aren't early childhood people and they're not involved in the decision, but there's plenty of people in the field who are also cheerleading for this kind of early instruction.
The other aspect of this has been discussed frequently is that people who are working in the field will be measured by what they know about cognition rather than emotions or psychological components. And I worry a lot about that, because as we're talking about certifying, quote, teachers in the field of early childhood, where does my knowledge of roughhousing come in? Where does my knowledge of rough and tumble play happen? Those things, again, when you look at the criteria for accreditation and STAR programs, etc., that are already existing in most states, we're talking about criterion that really doesn't fit what we know young children need. And I'm worried that those are just going to be adapted, placed in, because they're already existed, placed in programs and call that quality.
Right. And if these preschool for all programs, universal preschool programs, are to be part of a school system, then they're going to have licensed teachers, and early childhood programs, child development degrees don't have that kind of licensure. So it's going to be elementary education teachers.
Absolutely. And some of those people are good people,
absolutely, but they don't get that specific training for that age group because it's not their focus.
Doctors and dentists are both good people, but I don't want a dentist operating on my intestines.
Absolutely. Right. Yes. So that's the other argument I hear. There'll be higher salaries.
Maybe.
Maybe. And therefore, higher salaries mean more quality in the type of person serving children. And we have no research to suggest, it's not that I'm opposed to giving people higher salaries, especially in the field, but to advocate on behalf of people who don't have what I consider necessary for working with young children concerns me again.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So one that I heard recently was, well, this is great because if our 4 and 5-year-olds become part of the public school system in a universal pre-K system, we'll be able to focus on doing such great things for the toddlers. And I don't believe that. I believe the toddlers would be on the receiving end of getting school readiness, would be a toddler now trying to get them ready for that universal pre-K classroom in the school.
I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah. That was kind of, I haven't heard that from a lot, but I did hear that here in the last few months or so.
Part of what's occurring to me as I'm just listening in this conversation is this, the whole piece that is the, I don't know what, the funnel that gets children from the world that Dan just described into kindergarten are kindergarten readiness standards, right? But then I sat here thinking, do we have first grade readiness standards or second grade readiness standards? We just keep pushing those kids forward, whether they're ready or not. And yet there's this guard at the gate for kindergarten that says, this is what you need.
Right.
And whoever trained that guard totally gave them the wrong instructions on what to look for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just ended another semester at our preschool and did all our family conferences, and it's just days of conversations about school readiness, and it's so frustrating because I can give them all of my, my thoughts, and I can back them up about what kids really need to be ready to go. And even what kindergarten teachers tell me they would like the kids to be able to do when they get there. But the marketing and a lot of the screenings and tests kids are having to take to get into kindergarten, send a very different message.
The other concern I have is the idea of assessment that has been suggested and hinted frequently, that we will develop tools which will enhance the knowledge, because we'll know what children don't know, and therefore we will focus on those areas.
Yeah. So it's a deficit setup from the very beginning.
And I'm thinking, what other age do we have? I mean,
yeah. What did you just say, Richard?
Well, I mean, just to acknowledge what you said, Dan, I mean, you're absolutely right. And it's crazy. There is no other age. But also I would say, in addition to, Heather was saying it's a deficit. How did you say it? A setup for deficit?
Deficit setup. Yeah.
Deficit setup. It's also a corporate based setup. Because when I hear Dan use that word tools, I already hives start popping out on my neck. Because just like you mentioned earlier, Heather, about the curriculum, who's developing those tools, and what is their agenda? And, so a good portion of my career was spent in Washington, D.C. at certain national organizations that shall remain nameless. And for anyone out there who's listening who doesn't know, there are a lot of lovely, very wealthy people in the DC area, because they are the go-to leaders, matriarchs in our field. They are the go-to leaders for every government-funded project, because they're local. They're right there in the area. And so there has been quite a windfall from this handful of powerful people and the corporations they've created that stand to benefit a great deal from the creation of those tools.
Yeah.
And it's just important that we're all aware of that aspect of it too.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm gonna throw in another thing I've heard in this conversation, and that is people doing the work in early childhood right now, hearing these promises and these suggestions and saying, yes, we're finally going to get the respect we deserve.
Right. Oh, you.
I'm waiting to hear from you now. I can go again.
Just fine, because I'm thinking that is so stupid. Excuse me, not that you are or the people who say it are, but the idea that we'll finally get the respect that we deserve is not going to be based on universal pre-K, because in most cases, from what I've seen as terms of what is going to be made available, doesn't support what we know for a fact is appropriate for young children and families. So I think just the opposite is going to occur, that essentially what we're going to do is remove, I'm worried that we're going to remove some of the things that we've already established that are important for children, and replace it with crap.
Yeah.
So what's an example of something you fear will be removed?
They will remove play in general. I mean, I'm being real general in terms of that, but that's my biggest concern, is that because play has already struggled, because it's not measurable in some, or people don't think it's measurable in some cases, and that's not that the focus isn't on measurement, it's on making sure that things happen, essentially. So I'm worried that those kinds of initiatives that we've already worked on for quite a while now, and I feel pretty good about the programs that believe in play and are providing it. It might be at different levels, but at least I think it's moving in a direction that, like for schools and loose parts and all of those terminologies, I don't believe are going to be part of this universal pre-K approach.
And someone suggested that in a comment thread earlier this week, that these places would be very academic focused and we would lose play. And a couple other people said, that's so pessimistic. I don't think that you can make that broad statement. I was like, what have you seen in our current reality that makes you think that's overly pessimistic that would happen? I get people who are like, well, maybe we
STAR programs in each state.
Yeah.
I mean, if you even look at what's already existing in some agencies, the measurement for what is just so far-fetched.
The other thing I want to say when people say we're finally going to get the respect we deserve is, what are you seeing about elementary school teachers that make you think they get the respect they deserve? Like, that's not something that we've established there. So how does us joining them get us there?
No, oh gosh, this conversation could go down so many different roads. There's so much to unpack. But as we've often said on this podcast, people get into this field because they remember their teachers. They don't really remember back far enough to their early childhood years, and they want to be a teacher. And they have friends who are teachers and are certified as teachers and are unionized as teachers. And that's really attractive. I mean, I need to feed my family and I can't do it on $11.34 an hour, but my friend is making $36,000, $45,000 as a first grade teacher. I deserve that. And if that means I have to do more teacherly things with these kids, they'll be all right. I can't blame them for that line of thought.
No, I can't
but as
either.
a child advocate, it scares the hell out of me.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was just going to say. I don't blame them for that. I've certainly been in a position where, just a few thousand extra dollars would have made so much difference. But when you look at it from but we're in this for, making sure we're doing the right thing for children. So what do we have to sacrifice? What compromises do we have to make? And how will that affect the children we came into this work? It's a dilemma. I'll just say that. It's a dilemma.
And I'm always like the anti-bias guy, and at every podcast I always have to feel like it's part of my life's commitment to bring this into the conversation is when we talk about preschool for all and serving everybody, which segments of our society might even benefit from that sort of a curriculum and an assessment tool? And might there be systems in place in our society that are right out of the gate going to set up children of poverty, children of less means, children who of color, who, and I'm not making a broad statement about groups of color, but we know that there is a statistical connection between poverty and color. And so we already have systems in place. We know this, where schools funding is defined by the community they're in and how they score on tests. And if we bring that into early childhood, which it already is, where where pre-K is part of the public school system, it's only certain segments of society certain segments of society lose out far more than others.
I agree.
I think that then what people come back with is, well, what about like the Ypsilanti study in Michigan, where they, 20 years, 30 years ago, however long, maybe it was 40 years ago now, where they, they had these children who came from poverty. And I think many of them were children of color, and they participated in this early childhood program. And we saw all these longitudinal gains and improvements because they had been part of that program. But it wasn't it was a care program. If you really look at what they were doing, it was like a care and a play program that also addressed how can we relieve some of the stressors of poverty for these families. And so it's not just, oh, we opened up a preschool classroom and we did numbers and letters and shapes, and now they're going to live crime-free and graduate from high school and have all these great gains. It's much broader than that. But especially now when we're saying school, not daycare, and we have this research. Well, the research is not school. Like the research wasn't done in a school.
Uh-huh. Well, and you look at the foundations of Head Start, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at that, originally the whole way that those children were going to get a head start was to have support for their social and emotional development.
And food for their families and support for their parents. And yeah.
And that got lost along the way, in my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, Richard, I want to compliment what you said, is the fact that it's important to realize that if we're really talking about preschool for all, does that mean that we are bringing everybody to a particular standard?
Yeah.
Rather than looking at where someone is, where the family is. And again, it doesn't matter what color, what race, which gender, but taking a look at where people are and what we can do to support them where they are, rather than bringing them to a standard that everybody is going to be acting and behaving like, and etc., would not be respectful of any form of diversity program.
Right. Because that standard is a white middle class standard.
Absolutely.
Where we're trying to get them to. We're trying to teach them to be white middle class kids.
Right.
By inflicting that culture on them earlier and earlier.
Right. So is there anything good about Universal PreK? Because so far we've talked, is there anything good about it? Because that's another thing that people are going to want to hear.
I'll tell you one thing I thought of earlier in this conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was during a negative part, but it popped in my head as a positive. My last position before this one was a director of a large childcare center in Vermont. And when Heather was talking about bringing it down and then focusing on the toddlers and that line of thought, I can say in my role as a director, there were so many hoops to jump through to get early intervention services for my preschoolers, because in order to do that, you had to contact the school district in which those children were going to go to in their futures, and have someone come out from that school district, if that school district even had that program, to make that determination. And so most often children did not get services. Theoretically, if those same children were part of a larger system to begin with, maybe they would have more access to those early intervention services, and the fund, and what funds them. Maybe.
The only positive that I can come up with right now is if you're, that struggling parent who can't afford to pay for another year of childcare, and someone's offered you some free preschool in the school building that your other kids go to, that's maybe some relief for that family, but still not what I would hope for that family.
Right. And Richard, also the fact that I love the idea that children perhaps might have an early identification of perhaps the needs that need to be addressed. The opposite of that, I'm trying not to keep it negative, but the opposite of that is sometimes the programs that I've currently observed expect higher levels of standards for children of special needs than they do for children who are not special needs. So is this going to be more of that? Again, I agree that we need better intervention services, or more of it would be, and I'm hoping that this would provide for that. I'm just concerned that who sets those standards again?
Right.
Like Heather said, who are they going to ask to develop the curriculums for these Universal PreK programs? It could be a body of people who are very knowledgeable and understanding and recognize. That's not been the history.
Yeah.
So I see that as a positive, maybe bringing people together to talk about early childhood and the way it needs to be addressed. Maybe.
Yeah. I can tell you the people who hold the reins of power in DC are often so disconnected from what's really happening in our field across the country.
Yeah.
And that's part of what shook me to my boots when I was there.
Yeah.
And, again, just to frame it from an anti-bias standpoint, I know I'm a broken record on this one, but, we live in a misogynistic, patriarchal society.
What?
Surprise!
This is news to me.
And we find ourselves in a field that is driven primarily by female power. And so, and has been for over a century. And so we're already set up for failure. In that when you take into consideration the context in which our field exists, you just see that it's not likely that the people who are going to be put on those committees and who are going to fund them and who choose all those things aren't going to pick any of us three or anyone who's really had their feet on the ground in the field to have a sizable role there.
Yeah.
But then the other thing I would comment on is you've used, Heather, I think you used, or maybe Dan too, used the word standards a couple times in this conversation. And, I would hope that all of your listeners, as we sit here in 2021 and everything that we've all been through for a long time, but particularly in the last couple of years, are waking up to the fact that we live in a very non-standard world.
Yes.
And trying to standardize it is the wrong direction for us as a society.
And it's a myth, like it just can't be done, right? It's not just the wrong goal. It's an impossible goal to standardize any group of people. But I would think especially the young ones who are still, they've got 24 months, 36 months of experience on Earth, and we want them to master all these skills to be just like everyone else so that we can just keep this march going smoothly.
And I think what's so painful for the three of us and people like us is that while all of this has been playing out for decades and we've been watching it, the other thing that's been happening concurrently is all the science, that Bev Boss taught me to respect and look at and start from. And we've watched it unfold for decades now. We know more than we ever have about what young human beings need, about what young brains need.
Yeah.
And it is crazy making to know that and see the opposite occurring in our world.
Exactly. And even all that new brain development that is fairly new to us is supporting that rich history that Bev, had, and that you're talking about and that we've had. And instead, we've taken this brain research and we've tried to make our traditional schoolification fit somehow, instead of saying, oh, wait, maybe this is supporting that other way that we've been poo-pooing for so long.
Right. I'm about to say something that,
Make some bones, Dan.
But I get, but there are currently major early childhood organizations that will probably support the idea of universal pre-K.
Yeah.
And part of that is because of what Richard said earlier. It's a corporation, it's a money-making project, and there's money to be made. Let's face it, there's money to be made. I am concerned that those agencies, and it's a very large one, NAYC, who would...
You just said it out loud, Dan.
I said it out loud. Who already has set up standards and criteria and accreditation process, in my opinion, has not really taken a careful look at things that are really relevant and natural for children. My concern is that they are perhaps going to be part of the decision makers of where this is going. And again, I'm not implying that everything that NAYC does is bad. I'm suggesting that, again, what I've seen in other states have developed based on the criteria would not be something that I would be comfortable with supporting.
Yeah, they're not immune from a little critical thinking.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
I'm tired of counting how many blocks. I'm tired of you have to have certain kinds of, I'm tired of that.
Yeah.
And that's my concern when we talk about standard again. Is that what this means? That everybody's going to have the same kinds of things and curriculum to work on, and it doesn't fit everybody.
Yeah.
And it never will, like you said, Heather. It never will, and it shouldn't.
Right. All right, Richard, your turn. You were going to say something.
Oh, I've already had 7 thoughts since then.
Okay. Well, pick one and say it.
Well, I mean, I said this on a previous podcast when I was talking about my current experience teaching community college. And well, I've said to Heather privately, my college just went through its NAEYC higher ed accreditation process. And I spent much of the last year of my life on those 7 standards and organizing all of our pieces of evidence to make sure that we showed, evidence of meeting those 7 standards. And there's a whole lot, to me, there's a whole lot of insanity of that entire way of thinking and the system that's been created around that way of thinking. And these are the people, as Dan mentioned earlier, who were training to go into our field. It's not only is it a myth that we can standardize young children's experiences, we also can't standardize the experiences of the people who will work with young children. And we're doing both of those things.
Yes.
And our beloved NAEYC spearheads both of those.
Yeah.
Yes.
I get to start that process in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Well, so I'll throw out there also just to hear what you all think about this. This is not a good thing, a concern, but people have said to me, so I have a lot of, we probably all do, but I have a lot of people in the world of family childcare and home-based settings that reach out to me. And President Biden's speech scared the hell out of them.
Yes.
Because even though he mentioned childcare in there, it's clear that there's got to be some way to, so when I said earlier, we live in a patriarchal society, one of the things that means is that we value the dollar, that things are about, everything is the spoke of the wheel or whatever is money and the spending of money. And so therefore, you have to have all those evaluation tools to make sure that the money is being spent appropriately and apportioned correctly. And so, these family childcare providers are saying, if that's where this country's headed, where does that leave me? And my little business I have going out of my home.
Yep.
And to me, that's not only
and some of the most beautiful early childhood experiences are happening in those family childcare homes.
That's right. Yeah. So not only is it, does my heart go out to them and their own personal fears for their business and their passion and their family, but also those children are getting what we know is some of the best experiences, early experiences. And those are the experiences that are being threatened with extinction.
Yeah. So I guess everyone listening needs to buy a copy of Elliot Haspel's book, Crawling Behind America's Child Care Crisis and How to Solve It, How to Fix It, and mail it to the White House. And maybe if they get 500 copies, they'll look at it, because he does talk about that, one size doesn't fit all.
Right.
And there's value in all of these settings, and parent preference and comfort needs to be taken into consideration, and family needs, and second shift people and third shift people. And, it's just, again, we can't standardize it because of the vast humanity That is part of it.
But Heather, might your perspective be skewed? Might you possibly have a crush on Elliot Haspel, and that's why you're saying these things?
No, that's Houston Kraft.
Oh. I can't keep track of all of your crushes.
No, Elliot hasn't reached crush level yet, but I do really have a lot of respect for this book.
I hear it coming.
Hope they're all listening.
Yes.
This did get me into trouble before. All right, you boys talk.
Well, I guess one of the things we haven't talked about is, so we've railed against Universal PreK, right?
Yes.
And said all the things we're scared of or concerned about. But then the next question people are going to ask us is, okay, so if not that, what should we be doing?
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping Dan knows the answer to that one, because I don't have a clue.
I wish I had an answer. I do know that perhaps we need to evolve into a climate that says early childhood is important.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to argue anymore whether or not it's daycare or childcare or babysitting. And we've already done that. Let's get over the terminology and move into what we decide is important for children and families, and then start. And in some cases, there are many people who are already doing this, but take a look at that and say, okay, how do I get more of that? How do I keep people in the field that are supporting that, which in salary is part of, paying them more is definitely a part of that. It's also making sure that we include families in the decision making and helping them realize that, that they are an important part of that. And I think looking at creating the universal approach of looking at any researching and evolving and changing is a good thing, but not universal pre-K. Looking at it in a way that makes things important, and then decide based on that, what do I need to do to change? But to start without looking at what already exists that's important, and then move on to how do we create more of that, is to me more important than starting again a program where everybody has to match and meet. I know that that's not the answer.
Right.
But I think the answer is looking at how are we different and what's good about that differences.
Yeah.
So what we can agree on is that we all agree that more funding should be channeled to the first 5 years of life.
Yes.
We could discuss, we could say it's because it's an economic investment. We could say it's because it's a human investment. We've had those conversations on this podcast too.
Right.
But we're all in agreement. More funding needs to head towards the first years of life.
Yes.
Then the question becomes, how much? How does it get spent? Who decides how it gets spent? And what criteria do they use? And who created that criteria? Is that sort of
I don't know how to tell you this at this point in the conversation, but it's all outlined in that book. Elliot talked about all of that.
We'll have him on the show and then have Dan and I on at the same time.
We'll get him again. All right. Yeah.
That would be fun. Yeah.
It would be.
Yeah. All right.
I'm thinking that why, Richard, why not ask the people who are doing it how much it's going to take? We all know that if we keep adults consistently in the field who move forward in their growth, we are going to have a better early childhood. I mean, I would bet my life on it, that if we, and we didn't evaluate it based on, okay, this person is better, so I'm going to give that person more money. I'm not talking about that. I'm looking at what is it that they need? And I know that an increase in salary is part of that. And looking at having them be involved in that process gives them ownership. We're going to keep them longer because, as you know, we're 80% of the field changes yearly is the latest statistic. And no wonder, we're so raffled.
And in search of standardization, because it's easier for those new people who are coming in 5 times a year to pick up a standardized set of things and implement it. Yeah.
But we don't talk to people. I mean, we brought up the family child care home issue. We don't talk to people enough about what they need and what's important and how do they want to continue with the kind of quality that they have. And we need to bring them together and have them make part of the decisions for a change.
True. Yeah.
And I would suggest that there are people in positions of power who very specifically don't want to invite those people into the conversation for a variety of reasons, but primarily it's because they want to hold on to their power and the money that goes with it.
Yeah.
Right.
But then the other piece of this complex math equation, and I want nothing to do with math, but I have to put it out there, is how do you do all of that? How do you acknowledge that this field takes a unique high level of skills, knowledge, and dispositions, and pay these professionals accordingly, and keep it affordable for parents who are in dire need of child care? Because to me, I don't know. I don't need to probably go down this road because Dan said we're past it, and you're right. But the thing is, I've never understood the difference between childcare and preschool. You've got a group of young children, they spend their days with you, they're playing, they're learning. It doesn't matter to me what you call it. It's all the same.
Well, see, Richard, preschool happens between 9 and 11, and the adult has to be in charge for the real learning. And then the rest is childcare.
Right.
Making my pink eye itch more.
We're not supposed to compare ourselves to other countries, but Sweden has been doing this.
No kidding.
For Pete's sakes, why can't we look at what they're doing and saying, all right, what can we do and what can't we do in this country? That fits. And part of it is the kind of support that families are given in Sweden, both moms, dads, guardians, etc. The kind of support that they are given in making decisions even about what's best for their child is something that I think we really seriously need to look at.
Right.
It's not like we don't have some models of what we can do.
Yeah.
So another part of the problem is that we're so Amerocentric here.
Yes.
That we don't think that little old country of Sweden has anything to offer us.
They're socialists.
Right? I mean, why does Finland not start reading instruction until age 7? Is there something we could look at? Nope, because I need my kid to get into the right high school, to get into the right college, to get the right job. I don't have time to wait till they're 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy. That's a whole other show, guys.
Right. I know. You say this every time, Heather.
I know. I
lose the list for the other shows, and then you lose your
That's exactly my system.
Time. That is your system.
Well, maybe you should start writing the ideas down then, mister.
Not my job. I understand you're still looking for an unpaid intern.
That is true too.
Good luck with that.
That is true. I'm surprised I get no takers. I post that annually. The unpaid nerd intern. Okay, well, I feel like this could go another hour, but we've been going for almost an hour, so we probably need to wrap it up. This happened with Dan and Lisa and I the other day. We were like, what? It's been maybe 20 minutes? It's been an hour.
That's shocking.
Right. So thank you guys both. Clearly, we need to keep having some of these conversations, and I hope that we'll get some comments and some feedback on the episode too, and maybe there's more questions that we can bring to another episode. So so thank you both for being here and for being super fun to talk to, even when I'm grouchy.
Thanks.
Thanks, Heather.
And thanks everybody for listening to another episode. We'll see you next week.